Allow them to get on in here and we'll get going. You can go take your Bibles and turn to Ecclesiastes Chapter 2 as we wait for those other guys to come in. Let me go ahead and read Ecclesiastes Chapter 2, starting at verse number 12. And I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do that cometh after the king, even that which hath been already done? Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness. And I myself perceived also that one event happeneth to them all. Then said I in my heart, as it happeneth to the fool, so it happeneth even to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For there is no remembrance of the wise more than of the fool forever. Seeing that which now is in the days to come shall all be forgotten. And how dieth the wise man? As the fool? Therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. You know, I was talking to Brother Mike yesterday. Ecclesiastes is difficult. It is so difficult to grab the concept of what he is trying to convey through the whole book. And if you take early verses and try to make them stand on their own, you will miss the meaning of what he's trying to convey totally. He's not saying that we should live in a monastery, although he is probably saying that to Brother Matt. You should live in a monastery. No, he's not saying that. He's not saying that at all. He's saying that because a life in many areas is vain, and in many areas useless. He's not saying, let's don't do anything in life. Let's not try to accomplish this. Let's not get married. Let's not do those things. He's not saying that at all, but you could get the perception that he was. What he's doing is this. He's taking a little salt and mixing it in, stirring it with a little flour, and he's getting an egg or two and stirring it a little bit in these first few chapters. He's putting in a little sugar, and he's stirring it really good. He's adding a little, I had to ask somebody, okay, Linda. He's putting in a little butter and maybe some oil and stirring it really good in these first few chapters. And if you look at just the salt, you start getting a skewed understanding of what he's trying to say. If you look just at the sugar, you're not fully understanding what he's trying to say. But in chapter 12, he's going to deliver a cake. And that's how we need to understand Ecclesiastes. It is not, early verses are not being dogmatic about a statement that's being made. He is trying to mix it all together so that we have a clear understanding of the end product. And the end product is going to be that cake. As we looked in chapter 2, verses 1 through 11 last week, he was musing about where joy resided on the second row. He wanted to understand where joy was at. How do I get that contented, joyous emotion that seems to evade everything we do? He thought about mirth. And what was mirth? What did I say mirth was last week? Does anybody remember? I'm sorry? No, most people think mirth is sadness. It's really having a frivolity and happiness that comes from that. That's mirth. Partying is mirth. That's mirth. And he talked about mirth and wine and eating and drinking and making merry. And he had, what conclusion did he have about all that stuff? It is vain. There's nothing to it. It may have a momentary happiness to it, but in the end, it is nothing but vanity. There's nothing that it does for me in the long run. He concluded it is nothing but emptiness. You know, as I think about our world, as I think about our country, as I think about people that I know, there is a trait that I see that is overwhelmingly in our lives, and it's the trait of emptiness. we walk around as empty people because we're pursuing all the wrong things. And that's what Solomon is saying here. Now, as we go into verse 12 through 17 today, I want to give you a brief synopsis of that. I'm trying a little different tactic to explain Ecclesiastes so we don't get focused on a verse and think that's developing doctrine. It's not. But verses 12 through 17, again, he's musing about emptiness and how the temporal pursuits really do nothing for us in the long run. He really expresses his displeasure how that over time, everything in life that he works on and puts effort in and produces, it becomes obscure and it will be forgotten. And I'm going to give you some examples about that in just a little while. To prove his point, let me ask you this. Who invented the combustion engine? This is a big thing, isn't it? This is a guy he changed our lives. Who invented that? Yeah, it was Benz. But most people don't know that. The point is, it's obscure and forgotten over time, and that's the very point that Solomon is making. Who invented the computer? We all know Al Gore invented the internet, but who invented the computer? That has changed our lives. These are the points that Solomon is making. I can work hard on developing and building something, and then it could be a great thing. But in the end, man, nobody even remembers me. That's what he is saying. Does anybody know who invented the vaccine for smallpox? My guess is nobody knows. That was polio. That was polio. My point is, I didn't even look it up because I didn't want to know either. We don't know. Do you see the vanity? I mean, it was a great thing he did, but in the end, it becomes obscure and pointless regarding the productivity of his life. And I'll dive deeper into that. Solomon is not saying that those things shouldn't have been done. You shouldn't waste your time building the combustion. He's not saying that at all. That's not what he's saying. What he is saying is that we shouldn't use these efforts to think that they are going to develop in our lives joy and happiness and contentment, because they will not. Who was it, Brother Matt? I thought you were looking it up. We should not use these things of life, whatever it is, to strive for joy in our life, because it won't happen. It will not happen. But every day we wake up thinking these things are what's finally going to make me happy, and they will not do that. In 12 through 17, when it comes to mankind's compulsion to build a legacy for self, I hear that term legacy all the time at work. We're just building. No, we're not. I'm making a money to support my family. That's all I'm doing. But people, you hear in the presidency, this is his legacy. It will soon be forgotten. And I will talk about that in a little while. Solomon understood this as he explored the reality of what he is writing about in chapter 2, that the use of wisdom for these things is as vaporous as madness and folly. Using for good things, it's as vaporous as madness and folly. In verse 12 through 17, he's going to really turn his thinking from the first 11 verses into a new direction. Previously, he had been considering the value of pleasure. And I'm going to tell you, pleasure brings no joy long-term to us. None at all. I think you guys, I'm thrilled you guys got to go to get away for a while. That was pleasurable, I'm sure. But pleasure in the long run brings no joy and long-term satisfaction. So he turns his attention to wisdom and madness and folly and begins to dive into those three. What is madness? We'll define what madness really is and what folly really is. But he's forced to ask himself, after going through these verses, he's forced to ask himself, who can pursue all of these things better than what I've done? There's nobody that can pursue wisdom or madness or folly or pleasure better than what I, Solomon, have done. I had the means to do it. I've had the intellect to do it. I've had the wisdom to do it. Nobody could pursue it better than me. And his conclusion was this: his successors, people that come after him, will not be able to do anything to prove more of what he's already proven in his exploration of wisdom and madness and folly. Does that make sense? I hope that's making sense to folks. I didn't get a shake of any head, so obviously it's not. I think Solomon's pointing this out. Wisdom does have its benefits. I'd rather be a wise man than a fool. So he's not saying that wisdom has no benefit. Make no mistake, I am not conveying that at all, and Solomon wasn't conveying that. He wasn't saying that wisdom has no value. Certainly, wisdom is better than the foolish. Certainly, it is better than that. But it is not where the ultimate source of our reliance should be. We have some smart men in here. I mean, very intelligent men in here. And don't rest your pursuit of joy and happiness on your mind. What's that?
I was looking around to see who you were pointing to.
You weren't the one I was talking about. No. He is saying, don't rest your ultimate source of reliance on what you can think and what you can do, because joy doesn't reside there. And one cannot put his trust in worldly wisdom to get to a point where he is contented and joyful and happy in life. We can't do it, but men do it every day. Let me see, I'm going to skip some verses here. Solomon's clear point is this: every generation after him will have the very same basic experience of life. The things that I've proven, future generations will try to figure the same thing out. I've already proven it, but they'll try to do the same thing to bring joy and happiness and contentment in their life, and they won't find it. That's what we will see in chapter 2, verses 12 through 11. You know, an aside here, somebody with an evolutionary worldview believes that mankind gets smarter and smarter and wiser, and can figure the things out that Solomon was uncovering. The truth of the matter is this: I believe, you may disagree with me, I think mankind has gotten dumber and dumber. I think he's gotten more foolish and more foolish. You know, I don't remember the class I was in college. It might have been a philosophy class or something. They always talk about weird stuff. And they were trying to show this point, that mankind has grown so much through history. I mean, today we can fly. They couldn't fly back then. But if you take away the gained knowledge that we have, what we've learned from previous generations, and you erase that from my mind and put me here as an island for me to figure out even about the wheel or the car, I could not even begin intellectually to have enough wisdom to figure out what I should do to get a mode of transportation. I would still be riding a horse. Does that make sense? That's where we are as mankind. We think because we've learned and saw previous inventions and intellectual achievements that we're somehow smarter than those before us. We are not. I think, if anything, we have devolved and become less intelligent. I think Adam was the smartest man that ever lived. I believe he was. He learned from God. I believe he was, and I think it's been going downhill ever since. Just my opinion. I'm not dogmatic about that, but yeah, I really am, probably. I'm going to skip to verse 12, I think. Let's go to verse 12. And understand this as I begin going into each of these verses, that what we are going to read are the ponderings, or the musing of Solomon in his mind to figure life out and where happiness resides. Verse 12, and I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do that cometh after the king, even that which hath been already done? You know, after his disappointment in pursuing pleasure and his lack of satisfaction, he turns and he looks at the things that he might have overlooked in his pursuit of wisdom and madness and folly. I have a question for you. What pleasure that you enjoy have you received disappointment in? Let me give you an example for Jeff. I am a University of Memphis football and basketball fan. You cannot be a University of Memphis football fan and not understand disappointment. You understand in that thing that I love. I love sports. But there is so much disappointment in sports. There is no pleasure there. Solomon is diving deeper into that. Let me ask you this. What possessions do you have that you thought was going to bring you to that pinnacle of joy and happiness? What possession is it that you have? In 1977, I was 18 years old. I bought a 1975 red Pontiac Firebird, 350, and it would fly. I drove it from here to Anchorage, Alaska. That thing was my joy until I got a scratch on it. Until one of the spark plugs started sputtering some. And that pleasure turned to disappointment. You name whatever area of life that you have pleasure in. I'm going to tell you, not based upon what I say, but based upon what Solomon and the Word of God says, you will experience disappointment in that pleasure, whether it's relationships or anything else. There is nothing but disappointment at some point in that pursuit of pleasure. Solomon became convinced that the pursuit of pleasure was fruitless and useless in our life. Fruitless and useless, yet we still do it. He became more determined to look even closer at and penetrating more deeply into the secrets of wisdom. How can wisdom help me? I totally see pleasure is not going to do it. So he thought that by using comparing and contrasting things, wisdom and pleasure, and seeing the benefit of both, he's putting it on a scale. He wanted to see which can I learn from that can help me in life reach joy. When you're voting for somebody, how do you determine who you're going to vote for? How do you determine that? I know this one's Republican, this one's Democrat, so I know who I'm going to vote for. Now, what we do is we look and we compare. We compare where people are at. That's all Solomon was doing with wisdom and pleasure, comparing them, understanding this gives me this, and wisdom gives me this. Now, what's the downfall? And that is exactly his approach to looking at this. How do we determine what brand of product we buy in the store? If you're like me, that one's $1.25, that's $1.10, I get the $1.10. That's how I do it. But how do we determine that? Some people pick a brand because they've compared pricing or what the result is of the product. That's all Solomon is doing with these two things. He is comparing and contrasting what those things do for him in life. And I hope that you see that. I want to give some definitions of things we'll need to know through the rest of Proverbs. What is madness? I'm looking at Autumn and Jackie for a reason. What is madness? Madness is this. You know, we see these words in the Word of God, and we read them, and we sort of just go right over them without trying to really understand what God is saying. Here's madness. This is madness. Madness is something that is intoxicating. It could be wine. It could be strong drink. It could be power. It could be lust. All of those things are madness, and I'll show you that. You know, I believe today we have leaders that are mad, that are intoxicated with power. They thrive on that. It is truly so much so that they believe that they can dictate to another person what they can put, what they must put in their body. This is madness. And that's what Solomon is talking about. That madness, that intoxicating thing that controls us and drives us, whether it's lust or power or drinking or any other thing that just pushes us, and we have to have it. We have to have that in our life. That is madness that Solomon is talking about. And folly. What's folly? I'm going to tell you what folly is. Building things for me and my legacy, whether it's a career that I can be puffed up in, or it's assets and things that I pursue because these are the things that I want in life, or if it's getting rich, those things are folly, is what Solomon says. Madness and folly. He's looked at wisdom, he's looking at madness and folly, and he's saying none of it are the things that I ought to be pursuing in life if I want true joy in life. Then he asks this question. After looking at all this, what can any man do after the king, after me, to prove any differently than what I've just proven to myself? What can any man do? I possess all the riches, all the wisdom. There is nothing that any man can do after me to prove any different than what I've already proven. Verse 13 really goes into that. Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. Do you see some of the back and forth that he's doing here? A little while ago he said wisdom doesn't do anything. Now, wisdom excels folly. Again, he's baking the cake. He is putting ingredients in one at a time. He's looking at both sides. He's comparing. He's contrasting. He's trying to figure out what the real deal is. He's looking at it all. Wisdom has preeminence over silliness, over folly, over foolishness. One is pleasant and delightful. That's wisdom. And one is very uncomfortable. One is useful in directing how I walk the path of life. You young folks, you need to pursue wisdom. He's not saying don't pursue wisdom. Pursue wisdom. But one is useful in walking the path of life. The other is very unsafe in walking the path of light. I got to tell you, the light that is delivered from wisdom is a light that will save us from any heartaches in life. I have busted in the middle of the night. When you get to be an old man, you have to get up a couple of times in the night. I won't go any deeper than that, but you got to get up a couple of times in the night. I have busted more toes in the middle of the night than I have toes. It happens all the time because I'm walking in darkness. Light is compared to walking in joy. In joy. Darkness is busting our toe. So he's saying wisdom does exceed folly. You know, before, do y'all know when electricity was first established in this country? Does anybody know? Yeah. I think the Chicago World's Fair, and I don't remember the year, is where it was first shown. But I think people forget that 100 years ago, man lived in darkness. We live in a time that's different than any other period of world history. But before electricity, there was what? John D. Rockefeller became rich on this, kerosene oil. Before that, before the kerosene oil, what was there? Candles. But with kerosene oil and candles, the only place that you had an illumination of light were in your homes. No place else out. The night was for this. This is what night was for. This is a weird concept, I know. This is really weird. But when it got dark outside, night was for sleeping. That's what it was for. And not much was accomplished at night. Obviously not staying up watching television, etc. The day, walking in light. The day, on the other hand, was for a time of doing. It was a time of earning. It was a time of making. And what Solomon is saying here, wisdom is the daylight. The contrast, the comparison. Foolishness is the dark. You're going to bust your toes if you live foolishly. If you don't live wisely. Verse 14, I've got to hurry. The wise man's eyes are in his head. And everybody wants to say, duh. That's sort of where they're at. Obviously, the eyes of every man are in his head. But the idea is this. He's making use of spiritual eyes. And every time I think of spiritual eyes, I think of Brother Mike, because the conversations that we've had about that. The wise man looks at life with spiritual eyes. He looks about him and walks circumspectly. He determines where he is going to go. The wise man, he takes heed to his goings about in life, where he is headed. He foresees the evil. One of my favorite verses is, as a prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself. I remember that verse just every day in life, just about. The wise man foresees it and avoids the pitfalls of life or the dangers that he's exposed to, and he guards against them. He observes the path that he is on in life. He looks at where I'm at today. Where is this path of life going to? That is the wise man. And he knows that activities that he's working on in the day that he should do with all of his might. But the fool walketh in darkness. This is the fool's eyes. What is out there in the world that I can get for me? For me. I got to tell you, in America, we have a lot of foolish people because of this. Their eyes aren't on the path that God has designed for them. They're after self. This is foolishness. Probably a few of you guys know this. There's someone that some of us know who was photographed in Washington, D.C. on January the 6th, swinging a steel bar at a police officer. That was not walking circumspectly. That was not walking in the path of light that a wise man would walk. That is walking in the path of the foolish. And there are many like that. The fool doesn't know where he is. The fool doesn't know where he's going. The fool doesn't know where his next step would be. I just imagine this guy, and obviously I won't say his name. He's at that rally, and attending the rally is fine. But then people start running over to the Capitol building. And the fool says, oh, it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this, because he doesn't think where this is going to lead. The wise man says, I'm not going over there. That's not the thing that I should do. the fool will stumble and fall. Therefore, Solomon says the wise man is preferred over the fool. Let's go to the rest of verse 14. I think it's 14. And I myself perceive also that one event happeneth to them all. Solomon's quandary is this: I'm living a life that's right. I'm thinking about things. I'm making prudent, wise choices. But in the end, I see the same thing happens to us all. It happens to us all. I'm going to die. The fool's going to die. I have issues and problems of life. The fool has issues and problems of life. We're all, Brother Mike, in my view, I hold him in high esteem. I think he is a wise man. Here's the truth of the matter. Sir? He is subject to the same diseases that I am. He is subject to the same disasters of life that I am. That's what Solomon's saying. I'm the wise and I see the fool, and the same thing happens to us both. Life doesn't differentiate on the issues of life that come at me based upon wisdom and foolishness. There are wise people that are in poverty. Do you know that? We think that being wise might all of a sudden you're going to start making money, and that's not the case at all. The loss of a state or of children or of friends to death happens to the wise and to the fool. The Bible says, think about Solomon. Who was his son that took over the kingdom and was a foolish guy? Rehoboam. And I imagine he looked and saw some of the fools having foolish or wise sons. The point is that the events of life are going to happen to Josh and Brother Mike and Brother Dennis and Brother Matt, just like it does the fool. Just like it does the fool. Verse 15, and I've got to hurry. Then said I in my heart, as it happeneth to the fool, so it happeneth to me. You know, I just imagine that what he was thinking about was a king that came before him. As he thought about the fool, I think he was thinking about Saul, the son of Kish, who went against the word of God, and his kingdom was taken from him. And Solomon's thinking, you know, at some point, I won't be ruler and king anymore. It may be because an individual takes it, or it may be because of death. This too shall come to an end. And I think that's what he's saying here. I think that he is looking and understanding that joy doesn't come to those in power. And verse 15 continued. Now again, I got about 5 minutes. And why was I then more wise? His conclusion is this: I don't know. What value was that in life? Then I said in my heart that this also is vanity. Do you see the overriding issue and point that he's trying to make? The things that you and me and you 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 and all of us pursue in life, it's vain. It's vain. I feel like that this type of lesson is received much better in a third world country than it is in America. Because we can't get it out of our heads that I have to gain and grow and improve and pursue and get and retain and hold, because this represents who I am. And it doesn't. It doesn't at all. I was talking with Brother Mike yesterday, and I think I said this, you might have said it. We will be so shocked at the judgment seat of Christ on the rewards that some people will receive that we probably look down on because they weren't as high of standing in society as us. Or we feel like we were intellectually superior. I think there will be some people we've never heard of at the judgment seat of Christ that we will think, wow, I never knew. I never knew. Verse 16. For there is no remembrance of the wise more than the fool forever. Has anybody ever heard of Elijah Mccoy? There's no remembrance of the wise more than the fool forever. Who is Elijah Mccoy? Does anybody know that name? We should. Elijah Mccoy was the son of slaves in the 1860s who ran away and went to Canada. And he's the guy that many say the term, he's the real McCoy, was named after, because he invented for steam engines an oil drip can that lubricated the internal workings of an engine so that they wouldn't wear out and they would function. That same design that he invented back then is the same design that we use in cars today to ensure that the pistons and the crankshaft and the camshaft are oiled and running. Same exact design. He invented that. And he is obviously the real McCoy. But again, we don't think and remember that anymore. Let me look at verse 16 again. For there is no remembrance of the wise more than the fool forever, seeing that which now is in the day to come shall soon be forgotten. Most of humanity has forgotten him. It doesn't matter. During that time, he was very famous. He was well known, but we have forgotten him. Mankind's fame can continue for a little while, but others rise up and we forget who was before. Let me ask you guys, you men, this. Who is Bob Cousy? Does anybody know who Bob Cousy is? I knew you would know that. Did anybody else know that? Bob Cousy in the 50s and 60s was considered one of the greatest basketball players of all time. Little short guy, played for the Celtics. He was the first guy to start dribbling between his legs and behind his back. Greatest player ever. No one will ever be like Bob Cousy until Bill Russell come along. And then Bill Russell, the greatest ever. And then until Wilt Chamberlain come along. And he was the greatest ever. Nobody will ever be like him. Or until Kareem Abdul-Jabbar come along with a sky hook and the best ever. Until Michael Jordan come along. Personally, I think he was the best ever. But pretty soon he now is being forgotten because a young generation is coming up saying, LeBron James, the best ever. There will be another LeBron James, Michael Jordan. And the point is there's no remembrance of those things that we strive for our life to succeed in. And we think it's bringing us everlasting fame and fortune, and people will remember it. No, they'll be forgotten. They'll be forgotten. I was in England, I don't know, probably the mid to late 1980s, 1990s. And I wanted to go see where Charles Haddon Spurgeon preached. So I said, where's the Metropolitan Tabernacle? The what? Charles Haddon Spurgeon, at that time, the most famous guy in London, one of the most famous guys in England, and one of the most famous guys in the world. The place where Charles Haddon Spurgeon preached. I want to go see that. I don't even know what you're talking about. Time moves on and forgets all that we do, and we still live our life pursuing that. Fame, money, and remembrance. Charles Haddon Spurgeon. The verse continues, seeing that which now is, in the days to come, shall all be forgotten. Does anybody know what scurvy is? What is scurvy? Let me ask the Navy guy, because this is pertinent to Navy. Yeah, it's a vitamin, and here's what scurvy does. Before meth became the number one cause of tooth loss, it was scurvy. And scurvy, as hilarious as it sounds, your gums start bleeding, and then your teeth loosen, and then they just fall out. Your skin gets real spotty, and you start bleeding out of your nose uncontrollably, and then you develop open sores and become immobile and die. And the British Navy discovered that if they would take lemon or lime and eat it, that it would stop scurvy. I don't know if do you know the British are called limeys? Do you know that? My mother is British. That's why they're called limeys. That's why they're called limeys. Most people, we forget about that stuff. Who was the captain of the ship that discovered that? We don't know. About 300 years before Jesus was born, the Romans invented something that was phenomenal, that helped man during that time. It was something called concrete. But about 400 years later, forgot all about it. And it wasn't discovered again until 1756 in England. My point is this: the things that we think are important, that push us up and make me a head and shoulders above others because I've done something so great, it will be forgotten. And that's all Solomon is trying to say here. It will be forgotten. And let's look at verse 17 and we'll be done. Therefore, because of all this, I hated life. What's the use, man? No, he's not saying, I hate life like that. He's saying all the things I put my time in, it really amounts to nothing. All the wisdom that I've used in trying to figure things out, it amounts to nothing because it'll all be forgotten in time. The rest of that verse says, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. I'm going to close with this and ask you, where are our priorities? That's the question that Solomon is figuring out. And he'll reveal to us in chapter 12 of Ecclesiastes, where are the priorities of life for us? Is it where it will produce joy and happiness and contentment, or is the one that brings vexation of spirit and us being put in despair? We're dismissed.